In a world that's automating faster and faster, a huge question is starting to feel less like science fiction and more like, well, reality. Who actually owns the robots? Let's dive into why this might just be one of the most important questions of our time. For most of human history, the biggest economic problem was pretty simple: scarcity. How do we make enough stuff, food, energy, you name it, for everyone? But technology, and especially automation, is flipping that old problem on its head. And that gets us to the absolute heart of the matter. The new challenge isn't really about production anymore, it's all about distribution. When machines are doing more and more of the work, who actually gets to enjoy all the wealth that's being created? That is the big puzzle we're going to unpack. Okay, here's our roadmap. We're going to tackle this in 5 parts. First, we'll look at what we're calling the broken link between jobs and wealth. Then we'll get into the debate of income versus ownership. After that, we'll introduce a pretty big idea: universal capital allocation. Talk about how it could actually be built, and finally, dream a little about what the abundance economy could look like. So, let's kick things off with why the old economic playbook just might not apply anymore. For decades, our economy ran on a pretty simple and, honestly, a pretty reliable assumption. The whole idea was a neat little loop. When the economy grows, companies hire more people. More jobs mean more people have income to spend. And when people spend, that creates more demand, which, you guessed it, fuels more growth. It was a beautiful, virtuous cycle. Yeah, but that cycle is starting to break down. See, today, economic growth is being driven more and more by capital, by really smart machines, by AI, and less by hiring more humans. And because of that, the reliable link between a growing economy and more jobs for people is getting weaker and weaker. And this creates this deep structural tension. Machines let us produce things on an incredible scale, but the money they make flows to the people who own the machines, not necessarily to the people who are earning a wage. So productivity rockets up, but for a lot of people, wages just don't. And that's the crack that's forming in the foundation of our economy. So, if wages aren't cutting it, what's the solution? Well, let's look at the idea that gets the most attention, which is basically finding a way to top up people's income. I'm sure you've heard of this one: Universal Basic Income, or UBI. The concept is straightforward. Every citizen gets a regular, no-strings-attached payment from the government. It's meant to create a safety net, an economic floor, so that your basic survival isn't tied to having a traditional 9-to-5 job. And look, this isn't just a thought experiment. We've got real-world data from trials all over, from Finland to California, and what they found kind of busts the myth that if you give people free money, they'll just stop working. In reality, it often leads to better well-being, more financial stability, and in some cases, it actually helped people get more full-time work. But, and this is a really big but, here's the main critique of UBI. For all its good points, it's basically a patch. It treats the symptom, which is a lack of income, but it doesn't fix the root cause, which is a lack of ownership in this new economy. It gives you money to buy things, but it doesn't give you a real stake in the machines that are creating all the wealth in the first place. There's also a practical hurdle, something people call the leaky pipes problem. Whenever you try to move huge amounts of money through a big system, some of it gets lost along the way. To bureaucracy, to middlemen, value gets siphoned off, so what starts out here doesn't all end up there, in people's pockets. Okay, so all of that leads us to a completely different way of thinking about this. If the real problem is that people don't own the robots, well, maybe the solution is to give them ownership of the robots. So let me introduce you to Universal Capital Allocation, or UCA. The core idea here is to stop just giving people money from the economy and start giving them a direct piece of the economy. A real, genuine ownership claim on the very things, the assets, that are generating all the wealth. And once again, this is not just some sci-fi concept. We actually have early versions of this in the real world. The Alaska Permanent Fund, for example, takes oil money and gives a dividend to every resident every single year. Norway does something similar with its massive National Wealth Fund. These examples prove that it's totally possible to turn a collective resource into individual financial stakes for everyone. Now, they're instructive for sure, but they're not perfect. The payout from Alaska's fund, for instance, goes up and down with the price of oil, which isn't super stable. And Norway's fund is built to save for the future, not to pay out directly to people today. So they show us it can be done, but they aren't quite the model we'd need for the age of AI. So the big question is, how would a modern version of this actually work, especially when the wealth is coming from AI and data, not from oil in the ground? Well, you can think of the mechanism in 3 basic steps. Step 1, These amazing automated systems generate a ton of economic value. Step 2, we capture a tiny slice of that value, not really as a tax, but more like a royalty or an equity stake, like a national venture fund. And finally, step 3, we convert that value into ownership shares or capital claims and distribute them to every single citizen.
And here's where modern tech gets really cool. Remember those leaky pipes from before? Well, we could use new, transparent technologies, think something like a blockchain, to build a distribution system where the rules are literally baked into the code. It would be incredibly efficient and make it almost impossible for middlemen to divert the flow of value.
All right, this all brings us to the final and maybe the most profound part of this whole idea. Beyond all the mechanics and the policies, what is the actual point? What's the bigger vision here? Because what's really important to get is that this isn't just about moving money around. The goal is so much bigger than that. It's about fundamentally reshaping our relationship with the economy itself. It's about changing our role from just being a cog in the machine to being a genuine owner of the machine. And this quote just says it all. There's a powerful idea here that true dignity doesn't come from being dependent on a system for a handout. It comes from real participation. When you have a stake in something, you're not just a beneficiary, you're a stakeholder. It's a totally different feeling. And just think for a minute about what that could unlock for people. When your basic economic survival is no longer tied one-to-one with a paycheck, it frees you up. It makes it possible for more people to do work that's driven by purpose, by creativity, by community, all the incredibly valuable stuff that the traditional market doesn't always put a high price on. And so, we land right back where we started. As machines create more and more of our collective wealth, we have a choice to make. And this isn't just some abstract problem for economists to solve. It's a really deep question about what kind of society we all want to build together. What does the future of work, value, and ownership actually look like? That's a question we all need to start answering.